of the Ancients, and you are listening to Gnostic Studies. So, if any time that you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat box. And we're starting with the introduction, the mysteries and their purpose. Religion has always been twofold. There's always been a public or exoteric side of religion and a private or esoteric side. The public side is the one we see in the streets, parades, processions, public worship, etc. The private side is the one we don't see, the education of the monks and nuns, the priests and priestesses, or whomever it may be, that requires a certain dedication of time, energy, and effort in order to access it. The mysteries form part of the private side of religions and were generally for the instruction of the leaders of the religious form. Something that we should understand is the difference between religious forms and religious principles. Gnosis emphasizes that all religions teach the same fundamental principles. Their symbolism differs based on the culture and the time period in which the religious form emerged. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Religions as cosmic formulae. It is said that there are 7 great religions and 5,000 sects. We, the Gnostics, affirm that there is only one great religion, and that is truth. Only he who lives the truth is profoundly religious. The truth wants to know itself in each human being. Jesus of Nazareth is a living embodiment of the truth. Jesus incarnated the truth. Whoever incarnates the truth becomes free. Those who incarnated the truth founded the great religions and the great mystery schools. Buddha, Hermes, Krishna, Quetzalcoatl, etc., all incarnated the truth, and all those who dissolve the I and raise the columns of the temple upon the living rock incarnate the truth. There's no higher religion than the truth. We should distinguish between religious forms and religious principles. It is necessary to know that the principles are living cosmic formulae. Religious forms are the different teachings and different systems of teachings, those principles. The great, infinite, universal cosmic religion assumes distinct forms according to the needs of each race and of each era. Thus, religious forms have succeeded one another throughout millions of years. The successive string of the all religions that have existed in the world always reveal the same immutable principles of the truth. Religion is an inherent property of life, as humidity is of water. A person could belong to no religious form and nonetheless be profoundly religious. Everyone who is capable of experiencing the truth is profoundly religious, even if they do not belong to any religion. Religion is the intimate relationship of the mind with the truth. Only the religious person is truly revolutionary. Some philosophers say that religions have failed. We assure you that every religion has fulfilled its historic mission. With only one living Buddha being born from among the ranks of Buddhism, Buddhism fulfilled its mission. Only one Christified person among the ranks of Christianity justifies the existence of Christianity. Only one Imam among the ranks of Mohammedanism very much justifies the existence of the religion of Muhammad. All the great religions of the world have achieved their objective through people who obtain their religare, or reunion. That is to say, those who incarnated the truth. There's no basis for assuring that religions failed in their mission to religare, or reunite man with the truth. In all religions, there are perfect human beings who succeeded in reuniting. There's no motive which justifies religious wars, because all religions teach the same principles. The cosmic religion vibrates in each atom of the cosmos, because it palpitates in the heart of the sun, in the heart of human beings, and in that of the ant. So religious forms versus religious principles. Religious forms typically go through a few different stages. They're born, they grow and develop, they multiply and divide, and then they die. When a religious form dies, this means that the religious form is no longer a vehicle of the religious principles or eternal values which it was supposed to convey. These religious principles or eternal values do not die, they simply dress up again in a new religious form in order to manifest to the specific culture and time period in a way that is most appropriate or receivable. This is why religions often have similarities in their practices and terminology. The divine is trying to help us understand the eternal values in a way that we can receive. If in ancient times the gods were worshipped, today they are still worshipped, but they just have new names. The gods of the past are the angels, archangels, seraphim, ophanim of today. So all religions teach the same fundamental principles or eternal values. What happens is that when the religious form dies, the eternal values remain concealed in the symbolism of that religion, but there's no longer anyone in the religion who can translate or extract those eternal values. The teachings which explain how to decode or unlock the symbols were given in the esoteric or private side of the religion, the mysterious or mystery side of the religion, which is the focus of our studies in this class. So seeking knowledge. So how did one gain access to this private and often hidden side of spiritual teaching? The great master of the Christian mysteries, who we know today is Jesus the Christ, said something very interesting in regards to these things. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Matthew 7:7. And this sums up what needs to happen in order to begin our entry into the esoteric side of religion. There's an esoteric principle that we can understand in our times with the phrase, you get out what you put in, meaning that every effort you put in is directly proportional to the results you will get back. In biblical terminology, this is phrased as, you reap what you sow, Galatians 6:7, or by the fruits you shall know them. Causes and effects. There's always a cause-effect relationship in the universe, and if you want to advance in any area or any field, then an exchange is necessary. You cannot graduate from school without passing tests, and those tests require some time to learn information. If you want to have a successful business, then you have to be open, and you have to put in the energy there. If you want to play an instrument, then you'll have to practice as well. Everything in the universe is an exchange of energies, from one form into another. It is no coincidence that there is a law in physics called the law of conservation of energy, which states that energy can be neither created nor destroyed, but may be changed from one form to another. Modern science recognizes this law in the visible world, but the ancient science recognized that this law also exists in the invisible world. To further understand the application of this law, we must understand the esoteric knowledge or education taught in the ancient mystery schools. Education and knowledge. The modern concept of education is that it consists largely in the cultivation of intellectual information. But intellectual cultivation alone, no matter what extent to which it's carried out, in no way guarantees that a person will develop spiritually. Spiritual development requires internal work, and that will change our level of being. That is, our way of being, our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. Intellectual development without spiritual discernment and ethical concern is the origin of abuse. This is the problem with our present civilization. Intellect and altruism, which is the desire to do good deeds, does not necessarily go hand in hand. Intellectual or intelligence without love is in opposition to the divine plan for the progression of the cosmos. One may have a very clear intellect, have quick perceptions, be a good reasoner, and yet be very wicked. On the other hand, one may be very dull intellectually, and yet be kind, brotherly, and sympathetic. A world made up of caring simpletons is preferable to a world of wicked intellectuals. So if we just cultivate the intellectual powers without cultivating our spiritual aspect, we're actually hurting our potential for complete development. This is why we need an education that stimulates both our intellect and our spirit. And this is what we call esoteric knowledge or higher knowledge. When this knowledge is applied to ourselves, we can change our level of being and actually become different human beings. The key to this change is an exchange of energies. If I want to get more work done on the computer, I'm going to need to stop checking news websites and Facebook all the time. If I want to stop smoking cigarettes, then I must take that energy that I'm spending thinking, feeling, and acting about smoking and use it in another direction. If I want to stop being sad, then I need to figure out the causes of my sadness and address them. Basically, we need to understand this very simple phrase. To stop being what we are, we have to start being what we are not. This means giving up what we were in order to be a new person. This is the key to changing ourselves and our level of being, and to applying the esoteric teachings or higher knowledge to our lives. Higher knowledge provides us with the possibility of rounded development through the understanding of the laws of nature in the universe. Higher knowledge shows us how to liberate ourselves from the dominion of the senses, the sensual mind. This is all the sight, hearing, touch. The realms of opinions, prejudices, and beliefs, the intermediate mind. And illuminate our spiritual perceptions, our interior mind. It teaches us how to understand the laws of the universe in order to use them to our advantage and become masters of ourselves. The real master conceals his or her power and uses it only for the good of others. The real master works without the hope of fee or reward. Because of the danger inherent in the application of this knowledge, the ancients protected and concealed it in various ways from those evil persons who desired to possess it for selfish purposes. They were not doing it for the benefit of others. Only when you have a good heart do you deserve and have access to the secret sciences. Any human being who has this quality will use this knowledge for the benefit of mankind and not for personal or material gain. Evil human beings are not worthy of this knowledge or to know the path which leads to the art of happiness. There may be a stigma with this word evil, but as we know, if we're not doing good, we are doing the opposite of that. What would be a blessing for mankind through nature would become a curse, a plague for mankind in the hands of an evil person. The scent of fragrant flowers would be for nothing if you did not possess the ability to smell. To quote an old proverb, do not throw pearls in front of swine. A principle of nature teaches that even the most wholesome herb can, through the lack of knowledge of its power, turn into a dangerous poison. It is also the nature of the moth to fly into the flame because it lacks knowledge of what effect the flame has. These principles are very important. Think about them and remember them always. You do not obtain the understanding of this knowledge by only reading it. When you are looking for gems in a muddy area, You search slowly and thoroughly, otherwise you will not succeed. Do not believe everything, and do not reject everything. That it is the endeavor of a wise person to examine everything. Such a person cannot be easily deceived by looks or appearances. Their life is dedicated to searching for the truth. And we have a note here from another master, Olivis Levi. The source of this information, Eckhart Hausen, he belonged to the occult Masonry. So throughout this particular lecture, we're going to be pulling knowledge from occult Masonry, Gnosis, and some Theosophy. Also some fourth way teachings. The more knowledge and power a purely selfish person possesses, the more harmful to humanity they become. The selfish person can do less harm if kept in ignorance. This is especially true in regard to those deeper sciences which deal with the mind and influence the thoughts, emotions, and actions of others. Suppose the selfish man were able to hypnotize large numbers of persons at once and compel them to do anything, and that his motives were not just selfish, but also injured these subjects. And we have a link here to a documentary program called The Century of the Self. This is the danger of misusing higher knowledge. It can create a very tragic situation for those unsuspecting subjects. An authentic master who works to help humanity does so because they have developed their spiritual being, their level of being, and because they have first worked on themselves in order to discover all those indesirable elements that lead to the selfish use of the higher knowledge. The master's art is based on a science far deeper and more exact than modern physical sciences yet dreamed of, and behind this science lies a philosophy. The philosophy of the ancients. This philosophy is as profound as the cosmos, as inexhaustible as time, and as kind as the Father in heaven. It reveals to the human being the mysteries of his nature, the secrets of his organization, the means of attaining his perfection and well-being, and finally, the end of his fate or destiny. Ancient philosophy is based on certain principles that are universally applicable and demonstrate the structure and purpose of the creation. Often these principles are taught through stories or allegories designed to conceal the true message within symbols. Of course, this higher knowledge was a mystery to the common person because the keys to unlock the mystery were only given to those who were considered prepared to receive them. Each civilization had a special group or groups of people whose purpose it was to find and prepare candidates for the mysteries. This was done through certain methods particular to the culture and time period during which they existed. These groups were called mystery schools because they taught about the mysteries. So we're going to go into the mysteries of creation, manifestation through the word or the verb. Ancient cultures included in their mystery schools preparatory classes, certain stories that focused on the use of a special word. This word or verb causes creation to manifest and thus contains creative power. This word must remain secret so that its power is not misused to create for selfish purposes. In ancient times, a story was told with God using a word or words to give form to his intention. In the Egyptian tradition, we have, I am he who came into being in the form of the god Khepra, and I am the creator of that which came into being. That is to say, I am the creator of everything which came into being. Now the things which I created and which came forth out of my mouth, after that I had come into being, myself, were exceedingly many. And that's from the Book of Knowing the Evolutions of Ra. Also, I formed myself out of the primeval matter, and I made and formed myself out of the substance which existed in primeval time. My name is Osiris, who is the primeval matter of primeval matter. I brought my own name into my mouth as a word of power, and I forthwith came into being. I was one by myself, and there was no other being who worked with me in that place. We're going to move on to the Jewish tradition from Genesis, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the deep. And the Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim, moved upon the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In the Christian tradition, from John chapter 1, verse 1 through 3, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things receive being through him, and without him not one thing received being which has received being. In the Mesoameric tradition we have, there was nothing, they say, except chaos, although this was majestically covered by eternal heaven. Only God existed, Tepiu Kokumats, in an androgynous form, that is to say, simultaneously male and female at the same time, father and mother, creator and creation. From him, the hurricane emerged. That's a Mayan word which was later taken to the Caribbean seas, and which signified for the ancient Indians wind, breath, and word. Hurricane, as a deity, also formed part of Tepiu Kokumats, who they say utilized his breath or word to create the world. And he simply said earth, and the earth was created, being in the first term a cloud, then a gelatinous slime, and finally the solid and concrete mass of the earth. So there we have many different traditions, all with the same primordial verb or word that was spoken in creation. So we have the ancient and modern understanding of creation. One of the commonly accepted ways of seeing creation in our time is that it is an accidental creation. If we study the creation stories of the ancient cultures, we'll find the common theme that there was a conscious creation. This has a lot of implications, because by teaching that accidental creations are normal, or the way things come about, we're learning that the way everything we know has come into being is not intentional, but rather unintentional. But by teaching conscious creation, it instead implies that things should be carefully or cautiously created in order to intentionally manifest something very specific. The Hebrew Kabbalah in the name of God. In the Hebrew Kabbalah, this manifestation through word can be seen as the name of God. Or it may be better to explain it by saying, in the Hebrew tradition, the real or true name of God is not to be spoken, so that one does not unintentionally invoke its creating power, and therefore it is known as the ineffable name. But there are many names of God in the Hebrew Kabbalah, and this is because each one corresponds to a particular aspect of the manifestation of God, often said to correspond to the different sephirah of the tree of life. And here in this image we have an ancient depiction of the tree of life. Knowing which divine name corresponds to which aspect of manifestation allows the Kabbalist some insight into that aspect, and by pronouncing it in prayers, the Kabbalist is able to influence that aspect as well. And we also have the names of God in each sphere of the tree of life. This concept of a special word or verb that initiates creation is a fundamental principle taught in mystery schools through symbolism. The great mystery of the ineffable name is explained while mentioning that its true pronunciation and meaning became lost to all except the select few to whom it was confided. This was the profound truth hidden in the ancient allegory, and it was covered from the general view with a veil. The doctrine that matter is not eternal, but that God was the only original existence, the Absolute, from whom everything has proceeded and to whom all returns. So we're going to look at higher knowledge and how to develop spiritually. So what is this higher knowledge that's veiled in mystery and symbolism? It is a knowledge of the soul, of its origin, nature, powers, and the laws that govern its process of development. And this is precisely the knowledge which modern science and culture has neglected. But it was taught in the mysteries of antiquity. As Arnold Krumheller puts it, there's a dialect, a natural language. This language is that of nature, eternally living and eternally resounding, having its own forms. Its characters are indescribable. In every work of nature, everywhere, one will find these unchangeable characters. The essential and primordial language of light has different branches containing the divine, the spiritual, and the physical. From these come the language of light, the language of the spirit, and natural language. The origin of the primeval language is the nexus of the union of all these branches into a common trunk. The first man necessarily had this language, but it was lost. The mission of all initiates is to trace, little by little, the path to where it can be found again. All initiation is about the reconquest of this supreme language. Because in this language, the connection, the path, and the communication with the invisible world is established. And this language and writing of light is the synthesis of all of the intellectual and physical mysteries. This language of power is the power of powers. The paths to obtain this language of light are faith, knowledge of oneself, childlikeness, modesty, prayer, renunciation, church, purification, observation, and union. The acquisition of this language, including its pronunciation, grammar, sentence structure, etc., allows one to understand, by analogy, the structure and principles of nature herself, by allowing one to become supernatural, that is, above or beyond the normal or natural state of a thing. If you have any questions so far, feel free to put them in the chat box. We're going on to mystery schools, their curriculum and method of progression. The primitive instructors had two goals in their mysteries. The first goal was to take man from the state of barbarity in order to civilize him, and then to take the civilized man in order to perfect him, so as to return man, who was believed to be fallen, to his first nature. According to the ancients, man had to be redone. He had to be raised up to humanity, and only initiation could regenerate him. The second goal was to search for the means to return matter to its original state or former nature, which was also believed to be fallen. The matter that they wanted was gold, and the 7 metals that were then known were called each by the name of a planet, and formed an ascending ladder of material purification, which corresponded to the moral or ethical ordeals of the 7 heavens. In order to perfect himself, man had to work in 2 spheres, materially or physically, and morally ethically. The material or physical work corresponds to physics, nature, and alchemy, which is divine chemistry, or the science of elements. And the moral or ethical work corresponds to philosophy, the soul, and psychology. The physical work was to understand the laws, movements, and operations of nature so as to learn to dominate them and use them to one's advantage. The ethical work was to understand the organization, mechanics, and influences related to the soul so as to learn how to become master of oneself. And we are going to read about that. The dominion of nature and of oneself. Psychology is the part of philosophy that treats the soul, its faculties, and its operations. The psychological science, the science of the soul, is the first rung of that immense ladder that must be learned to climb in order to know the truth. But in order to reach that goal, one must be like in the beginning, being a human being, in the presence of nature from which one can receive impressions directly in the plenitude of their action. One must be completely exempt from scientific and religious prejudice. People often believe that the human being is the king of nature, but in the ancient mysteries, this was an idea that was not inborn in man, but it was something that had to be created or developed through a certain work. Those who could rule nature could also control themselves, and this was achieved through an interior transformation. But before a person was able to learn about how to perform this interior work, they first had to pass through certain tests. The physical requirements of the mysteries. In order to enter into the ancient mystery schools, one needed to be qualified in order to do so. A person who wanted to qualify for the mystery school was called a candidate. To dominate nature meant that the candidate had to dominate the four philosophical elements of nature: fire, air, water, and earth. These elements had their symbolism and correspondences under which they were concealed. And we have a brief table here. So we'll go over the elements and their correspondences. First, we have fire, whose animal is a lion. Corresponding direction is the south, and the material in alchemy is sulfur. For the element of air, we have an eagle, and the direction is east. And for the alchemical material, we have Azoth. We have water, represented by a man, out of the western direction, corresponding to Mercury. And finally, we have earth, symbolized by a bull, whose direction is the north, with the alchemical material salts. There was one symbol that combined these four symbolic animals together, the Sphinx, and you can see the image right above. The Sphinx has the front claws of a lion, the face of a man, the wings of an eagle, and the hind legs of a bull. The candidate had to pass physical tests related with the four philosophical elements of nature. The test for fire. The candidate has to pass through a fire obstacle, such as a room full of flames. The test for air was that the candidate was thrown off a cliff or into the depths of a precipice. The test for water. The candidate is thrown into deep water and believes himself to be drowning. The test for earth. The candidate finds himself between two enormous mountains that close in on him. When the candidate is successful in all the introductory trials to the path, he has every right to enter into the mysteries. Now we're going to talk about the spiritual requirements of the mysteries. To receive this higher knowledge, This knowledge of the soul changes a person's life, but this life change depends on the person's disposition. Are they going to use this knowledge to develop their soul, or are they going to use it to control the souls of the unsuspecting masses? Now we're going into, again, how that power is used for good or evil. The candidate for entry into the mysteries must always be worthy and well qualified, as well as duly and truly prepared, meaning the candidate must perceive that such higher knowledge exists, must desire to possess it, and must be willing to make whatever personal sacrifices necessary in order to acquire it. The candidate must have passed beyond the stage of blind belief or superstition, beyond the bondage of fear, and beyond the slavery of sensations and desires. This is the meaning of being duly and truly prepared. The candidate's motive alone can determine if they're worthy and well qualified. Just as all life is a process of development, so is all real knowledge and initiation, and it proceeds in a natural order and advances by specific degrees. This is true on every plane of life. But in the process by which knowledge is required, always through experience, the human being becomes the knowledge which is applied. That is, when applied, knowing is a progressive becoming. The result, therefore, is a continual transformation of the motives, the ideals, and the perceptions of the individual. The real scientific and philosophical meaning of all initiation is the spiritual development of the individual. Yeah. If you have any questions at all, feel free to bring them forward. This is a lot of material to take in. The development of spiritual force, awakening consciousness. Authentic spiritual development is directly related to the awakening of consciousness. J.D. Buck defines consciousness as follows. Consciousness is that living, active process resulting in the growth of a soul and in the increase of a man's power to apprehend truth. Gnosis explains the consciousness as a very particular kind of apprehension or grasping of interior knowledge, which is totally independent of mental activity. As we have said, one of the foundational principles of the mysteries is that the human being is fallen, lacks something, or is incomplete in some way. And that in order to transform himself, the human being must do something about this present state. Out of all you've heard, the most important idea is that with certain knowledge and certain efforts, the human being can develop. He can complete himself. The development of a human being, if it is a process, it is not obligatory at all, but passes through certain definite stages or steps. The thing that we lack, that we need to develop our is our consciousness. Something that must be understood and emphasized is that our present state of consciousness is totally asleep or dreaming. We are unconscious compared with our human potential. In its current state, the human being is actually just a tool of nature, a machine that plays its role in the natural order of things. In order to wake up and dominate nature, the human being must also learn to dominate himself, him or herself. This requires that we awaken our consciousness, that we work on our own individual perception and awareness, both of ourselves and of the world around us. Everything, all our potential, is found within, and it is only by accessing it that we can become masters of ourselves and nature. Consciousness is a force, and this force can only be developed by overcoming obstacles. Two things can be developed in a human being: consciousness and willpower. Both are forces. If a human being overcomes unconsciousness, he will possess consciousness. If he overcomes mechanicalness or mechanicity, then he will possess willpower. If a human being understands the nature of the powers he can attain, it will be clear to him that they cannot be given. These powers must be developed by effort. One's own efforts are necessary, because otherwise, even if a person is made conscious, he will not be able to use this consciousness. It is in the very nature of things that consciousness and willpower cannot be given. If someone could give them to you, it would not be an advantage. This is the reason why one must buy everything. Nothing is given free. The most difficult thing is to learn how to pay. Understand that to pay means an exchange of energies or making our own effort. But if it could be explained in a few words, there would be no need to go to school. One has to pay, not only for consciousness, but for everything. Not even the smallest idea can become one's own until he has paid for it, or provided the necessary action for the desired consequence. This is, of course, the exchange necessary for the development or change that we mentioned at the beginning of this class. Awakening is the result of personal work. It goes by degrees. Complete awakening means a very big change, and that needs time because it means acquiring new psychic functions. So we can only study degrees or steps which a man must pass through. One can be shown the way, but one must work for oneself. By itself, learning is a small thing, since the human being can only change himself through the application of knowledge he gets. So our ability to grasp this interior knowledge is directly related to the effort we put into acquiring it, and or our ability to apply it, and that will manifest in what is called our level of being. It's like working out. Someone can tell you about exercising, but you have to do the motions yourself to reap the rewards. The ladder of the soul's ascension. If we're longing for a real change, if we want to get out of this boring routine, out of this purely mechanical life, then we must create what is called a permanent center of gravity, or a magnetic center. In order to do that, we must first understand that each one of us is at one level of being or another. The level of being of the drunkard is different from that of someone who does not drink. The level of being of the prostitute is different from that of the virgin. Imagine the numerous rungs of a ladder, and we have this image ascending into heaven. The ladder extends itself upwards, vertically, unquestionably. We find ourselves on any one of these rungs. On the lower rungs will be people worse than us, and on the higher rungs, persons better than us will be found. On this marvelous ladder, it is clear that we can find all the levels of being. Each person's different. We're not talking about attractive or ugly, nor is this a question of age. People think that with time, things will get better, but this is not true. What really counts is our level of being. We are on a rung, but we can climb to another rung. The marvelous ladder, which we're talking about and which concerns the different level of being, certainly has nothing to do with linear time. A higher level of being is directly above us from moment to moment. It is not in any remote horizontal future, but here and now within our own selves on the vertical. Anyone can understand that two lines, the horizontal and the vertical, intersect from moment to moment in our psychological interior and form a cross. The personality develops and unfolds on the horizontal line of life. The personality is born and dies with its linear time. The personality is not the being. So let us establish the following as a deduction: titles, ranks, promotions, etc., all the worldly accomplishments in the external physical world do not mean an authentic exaltation or reevaluation of the being, or a move to a higher rung in the levels of being. A move to a higher rung on the ladder can only happen through a reevaluation of ourselves, of our values and our principles, etc. In order to obtain something we've never had, we must do something we have never done. And further, in order to transform ourselves, we need to stop being what we are in order to start being what we are not. And we have here an illustration of the cross, with the personality developing on the linear or horizontal plane, and our levels of being simultaneously occurring on this axis. In conclusion, the ancient mysteries taught their philosophy, which we can see in different forms throughout the world, but require the candidates to pass certain tests or ordeals in order to continue their studies. The purpose of the mysteries, at least from what we've studied so far, was the spiritual development of the individual, which is directly related to the awakening of the consciousness and the increase or elevation in one's level of being. Next week, we'll be discussing the Egyptian mysteries. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share those in the chat. We'll be having a meditation tomorrow night at the same time, and next week we'll be doing another lecture on Thursday. So we hope you can join us for that. Yes, I see that psychological death, it can indeed help a person that is very astute to realize the cause and effect of how the different changes are changing your level of being. So you have direct experience or gnosis of your own situation that causes an effect in your life. It's very good to start recognizing that. And that's a beautiful passage, that the kingdom of God is in fact within us. So we can have these teachings like this that can help point the way, but the way must be developed and experienced in our internal planes within us. Again, thank you for joining. Remember, meditation tomorrow night, same time, and we'll be continuing on with the Egyptian mysteries next week. Thank you so much for joining.